Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 201, is actually sort of a small addendum to Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 200, the 200th anniversary, where I recovered my Malokarpatan episode from way back when, and by that I mean I redid it because the old one sucked.
Boo! Fucking
And in that episode I mentioned, in the intervening years since the original Malokarpatan episode, and the fantastic remake, if I do say so myself, that I did last week, said band has become one of my favorite bands, and I've learned quite a bit more about them. And included in that quite a bit more is the fact that the members of Malokarpatan are involved in a number of other projects. So this week we're going to be covering two of my favorites, who both probably nudged Malokarpatan into the very unique direction they've been running with on the past two albums quite a bit. The first one of those is Remmirath. Now, you would be forgiven for thinking that a band named Remmirath probably just plays some kind of normal black metal. You know, they got the Tolkien name. They started way back in 2001 under another Tolkien name, Helcarax, before realizing that there's a fucking billion bands named that, so they changed it to the slightly more obscure Remmirath. But, yeah, no, not so much. They're really weird. They are defined by most metal outlets as an avant-garde black metal band. But what really makes these guys stick out to me amongst the large cadre of avant-garde black metal bands is they put out an album in 2008, at which point avant-garde black metal usually sounded like... And on this album, they were actually playing probably the closest thing this group of musicians has ever done to old school early 90s Scandinavian black metal. In essence, I would say that the decision to do that while still being an avant-garde black metal band is actually much more avant-garde than all of the other avant-garde bands. You know, by returning to a lot of like traditional black metal techniques, they are in effect going more against the grain than most of the avant-garde black metal bands were at the time. Now, this variety of avant-garde black metal actually used to be called post-black metal, which is very confusing because when the
SAWs and every hipsterella there is ever
started getting involved in black metal and realizing, hey, there's some sort of aesthetic overlap between old school shoegaze and old school Burzum. When we run with that, they started calling it post-black metal in reference to post-rock, whereas the original definition of post-black metal was harkening back to post-rock in a different direction. It meant that it was post-black metal in the same way that post-rock was post-rock. You know, it was what came after rock. This is what came after black metal. But now post-black metal means, you know, like Death Heaven or whatnot. So most people just call, you know, Arcturus, the weirder Solefald albums, the weirder Dodheimsgard albums, that kind of thing. It used to be post-black metal. Now it's avant-garde black metal. And that's the kind of stuff that Remmirath plays on their first album entitled Polis Rouge, the Red City, which I gotta think is a reference to William S. Burroughs' Cities of the Red Night. And here's why. If you don't know who William S. Burroughs is, he was a writer way back when. He's probably most famous for Naked Lunch, a book I actually discovered because Brett Stevens, this William S. Burroughs guy, was fond of combining very disparate elements in an absurd manner to demonstrate the absurdity of modern society. And that is a pretty similar thing to what a lot of these avant-garde black metal bands do. For instance, one of the godfathers of the genre, Solefald from Iceland, famously wrote, "Prometheus chained, I wait for the eagle to peck out my liver through the bulletproof glass. Survival of the fittest suits me just fine. The truth as it was told to me by Calvin Klein." You see them juxtaposing mythopoetic metaphors with modern commercial brand names. Remmirath does the same thing in a somewhat more edgy manner on their first album when they say, "I see Paris Hilton trading her cunt on the front side of a magazine. Uncle Sam with a hat as tall as the skies. Let us feed the machinery with our egos. Advertisement, mammon, the NWO pantheon." This seems like very Burroughs style writing to me, and that's why I think Polis Rouge is a reference to him. But I could be wrong, I don't know. But those lines give you a good idea of where they're coming from lyrically, spiritually, and even musically in a sense on this album. But like I said, what makes this stand out from other avant-garde black metal is that at its core it is still very black metal, and very good black metal. See what I mean? This is a solid, cavernous, bar chord-based black metal riff, and it leads into one of the defining traits of Malokarpatan. That, of course, being very catchy, very emotive, and very structurally integral lead guitar playing used to link together different sections of music. They were doing that way back before Malokarpatan even started, back when all they had was Remmirath. Another thing that Malokarpatan fans might recognize is the prominence of bass guitar. I really like the horns in this little section here. It makes me think of a certain French band, but it's worth noting that Famine and the Boys of Peste Noir weren't doing this kind of stuff back in 2008. Remmirath was, and that's what makes them pretty darn unique. I don't know if they influenced Peste Noir at all, or if they were just working on a similar mental wavelength a couple years apart, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Here's some more of that great lead guitar. Again, it's very important to the structure of the song. He's not just playing a solo to show off, it's working as an extra melodic layer, and you can tell by the fact that it repeats musical phrases and has a real sense of structure to it.
그러니까 엄마 아빠가 그거를 해주면 이게 하드렌즈니까.
You're asking why this is referred to as avant-garde black metal, because outside of like the wacky lyrical concepts and a few orchestral diversions, this doesn't sound that out of the ordinary to you as far as black metal goes?
아니 원스 여러분들이
What a succinct language you speak, but yes, that is a very good question. I picked that particular song to play first because it's my favorite on the album, possibly because it's the most traditional black metal sounding one. But Remmirath definitely earns the whole avant-garde appellation on some of the weirder cuts of this album, don't you worry. As this very odd, cynic-esque intro to the title track no doubt demonstrates with its clean guitars and weird flanged out bass notes, as well as lots of weird found sound collage type stuff going on underneath the surface. But even when we transition into the heavier portion of this song, it stays really strange, utilizing this sort of like analog sequencer to make a looping electronic phrase that kind of domineers over some chiming tremolo lead guitar, if I could talk that. There's a really effective counterpoint riff to that weird part. The guitars are sort of like interlocking with each other very nicely. But yeah, guy shrieking over an old analog synthesizer. That's definitely avant-garde black metal. The lead guitar is also very avant-garde. And here's some clean vocals for you. That is a common feature of avant-garde black metal, and while these might not be technically the most competent vocals around, I think they're like, they got a lot of soul in them. I like them. Going back into that great riff from earlier, acting as a counterpoint to the weird sequencer phrase, leading into some very, very spooky black metal type stuff. Bathory, of course, influenced Malokarpatan a lot. You can hear a lot of Bathory in Remmirath, too. There's that cool lead guitar again. That's probably the standout feature of this album to me, is the great lead guitar, as well as like the production. It has a really cool, like cavernous kind of spooky sound to it. But that's basically what you're getting with that first Remmirath album. And it's my personal favorite of the two they put out, but the second one is no slouch either. And on that second one, which came out right before the second Malokarpatan album, you can hear them shifting genres a little bit away from super, weird black metal stuff towards more of a heavy metal thing, which makes sense because that's also what they did with Malokarpatan. But this shift in style coincided with a slight shift in lyrical concept. So the first album, Polis Rouge, is about, all that weird societal stuff I mentioned earlier. This one, well, look at the fucking album title. You know what you're in for. It's literally called Shamballa Vril Saucers, okay? And I would say that this transition is actually one that makes sense. The first album is all about the absurdity and weirdness, crass commercialization of modern society. What do you do to get away from that? You go spiritual. Makes sense. You go esoteric. You might even go occult. They've changed up the vocals on this a little bit. They're more shouty, but not in a bad way. I actually rather like them. They're very powerful and masculine sounding. Makes sense for the whole Vril thing. Here's more of that great lead guitar focused on cyclical patterns. It was important on the first album. It's even more important here. And another thing that shows up a lot in later Malokarpatan stuff is these weird soft sections. They're very much a part of this album, and they would very much become a part of the second and third Malokarpatan albums that came out after this one. Here's that heavy metal stuff I was mentioning earlier. This sounds super cool. It reminds me a bit of like Hammers of Misfortune with like the weird keyboard lead guitar combination. And the fact that it's happening in a song where there's like screams and clean vocals. Another transition, can we pull it off? Why, yes, we can, and it's a fucking weird one, because over these Klaus Schulze-esque drones, we have a whole lot of odd video game noises.
Rocket launcher!
Check out this transition, it's so fucking cool, dude. As the electronics get harsher, so do the video game noises. They've switched video games to like a more combat-focused one. That's interesting, okay? That's smart thinking. I like that. It's not weird just for the sake of being weird. Although it is fucking weird. It also serves a songwriting purpose, which makes this great avant-garde black metal. That odd little chime sample actually made me think a lot of Master's Hammer utilization of the harp on their second album, but done with electronic instruments. So yeah, Master's Hammer influence definitely in full effect on this guy. I love the wah pedal on the tremolo pit guitars here. That's super spooky, super weird, super avant-garde, but also very well done. And not really that absurd for the sake of being absurd. Which is why Remmirath are one of the best avant-garde black metal bands, even if they don't get too much credit for it. Seriously, if I'd heard Polis Rouge back in 2008 when it came out, that shit would have blown my mind. But nobody was talking about that fucking thing. But maybe Remmirath is a little bit too odd for you. Maybe you even like a little bit of what you hear with Malokarpatan, and that's a little bit too strange for you. You're more into like traditional, old school fucking black metal. Well, if I got the band for you, because now we're going to talk about their other major project, Krowlock. Which, if you couldn't tell from the band name, is all about vampires, spooky castles, ghosts, goblins, witches.
You see that right there? That's a parabola. Now only a witch can pull off a parabola of this nature.
Got lots of cool 80s black metal spooky riffs that do lots of weird stuff like this. That weird little bar chord thing there, that dissonant bit. I dug that. That was cool. Transitioning into some very stormy, very atmospheric, spooky, rainy day black metal of a high caliber with crazy echoed vocals, giving off a little bit of a Grand Belial's key feel to me, at least. Maybe it's just because there's still a lot of latent heavy metal influence to it, kind of spooking around in the background. That's sort of a common feature of a lot of these guys' material, regardless of the band. And I like it. Here's a transition. That is so spooky, so dark, so 80s. Love that little drum accent. That's a great drum beat right there, too. That's almost like the Burzum drum beat, man. You know, digga, 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 like in War.
This is... wow!
Quality stuff. And check out who comes back right here. My favorite riff from earlier with that spooky Devil's Tritone diminished shit. Love it. And there's also sections like this. It still goes into those spooky Malokarpatan-esque softer sections, but here there's much more of an emphasis on an eerie atmosphere in lieu of the weird folk of Malokarpatan or the psychedelia of Remmirath. So you can tell it's the same guys doing the music, but they're doing it in very different styles in each of these three big bands they got going. And it sounds pretty darn great in all of them. It sounds, they got something for everybody. It's good stuff. Like awesome Destruction style hammer-on pull-off 80s thrash riffs straight off of Infernal Overkill. And it sounds amazing. But I can hear you out there. You might be craving something a little bit weirder given the musicians that are playing on this album. But don't you worry, they do get plenty strange. With some weird like two-step polka bass lines underneath odd shimmering dissonant bar chords. That's definitely strange, but also very dark and vampiric sounding. Check out the vocals. Very Rob Darkin-esque, which is not by accident because these guys have mentioned old Gravelands and influence in interviews. Here's a cool little transition. I love that little bass slide there. Wow, that was super neat. Really odd riffs, despite the fact that it is still very much traditional black metal compared to the weirder stuff. This sounds like something off the first Ancient album, man. This one, it really is a tribute to just really dark, spooky nighttime, not quite folky, but still very foresty black metal type stuff. With some very adept drumming, by the way. Very 70s, lots of fills. And of course, there is weird lead guitar. There is weird lead guitar in Malokarpatan. There is weird lead guitar in Remmirath. It's the same musicians in Krowlock. You're going to have weird lead guitar, and it's going to sound great. So what I'm super excited about is Krowlock. They put out this one album back, same year that second Malokarpatan album came out. They finally have a new one coming out later this December, squeaking in right at the end of the year. And it sounds fucking neat because, first of all, they've released advanced tracks from it, and the single is called
Your Soul is Mine.
And it's got a big old picture of Bela Lugosi on it. You know that's going to be some good shit. It's even got a rockin' Bela Lugosi intro sample from the 30s Dracula movie. Check out this hiss. That's how you intro a single, man. That was good stuff. Now, obviously, this is like the raw rehearsal room version of whatever's going to be on the final album. This is just something they did for fun. But I think it bodes well. It's promising. There's a whole lot of, thrash to it. There's a lot of very memorable melodies peeking their way through all of that black metal fog. And the vocals sound pretty malevolent. Check out that dank little King Diamond bit, man. That was cool. As we all know, these guys are heavily influenced by Merciful Fate, and it's good to see that's still around. It's good to see bands like this are still around. This is a group of guys with a whole lot of instrumental talent, making very complex and interesting, but not at all pretentious black metal. That's what we need more of in this day and age. So check out that new Krowlock when it comes out. Get yourself some Malokarpatan. Get yourself some Remmirath. It might be a little bit harder to find that last one, but look it up on YouTube at least, dude. Support it, man. Good fucking bands. And I will see you for the Christmas special.
Fuck you!